Chintamani Prakara Sadamasu.
The quality that has overwhelmed me all these years was Srila Prabhupada's inconceivable humility. Because he had that disarmed all of my anarthas and maya to the point that I could sincerely ask him the question. At first I raised my hand and he wouldn't take it. And then I raised my hand. He would wait until somebody else in the room raised their hand. Then he would take their hand. He would ignore my hand. 3 or 4 times like this. And I was rephrasing my question in my mind. Then I asked my question. And I closed my eyes and I said, Sri Bhaktivedanta Swami? And that was the moment right there. Because in that moment, when I said his name is actually the answer to my question before I even asked it. My question was, how is it that this universal presence, which is humanly inconceivable, to me at least at this time, how can it have this form of Radha and Krishna? So Srila Prabhupada, his very name is the answer to that question. He is Bhakti Vedanta. He is the end of knowledge, is Bhakti Yoga and devotion to Krishna. And so Srila Prabhupada, for a moment there, I just became disoriented. I said his name and I couldn't even go on with the question. And Srila Prabhupada very, very patiently waited for me. Everybody waited for me. It was a very intense moment because his glance was upon me and his mercy was upon me. So then he answered me. He said, by his mercy. And then he said something very astounding, for which was one of the main reasons that, it was a mystical thing, but it was one of the reasons that broke through my hippie anarthas or whatever I had, so that I joined. Srila Prabhupada said, you cannot make the sun rise. These are in my own words. It's in the folio much more eloquently. And similarly, you cannot make God appear before you just to answer your doubts. So what had happened was 6 months before, I had been sitting on the edge of a cliff after climbing a mountain all night long. And I was going to meditate on Om, and then when the sun rose, I was going to merge with the sun. I was going to become one with the one at that time. And Srila Prabhupada said, you cannot, and when the sun rose, after all this endeavor, I'd been fasting for days, and I'm sitting out here, I climbed all night long this mountain. When the sun rose, it was a cloudy day, and I couldn't even see the sun. So Srila Prabhupada says, you cannot make the sun rise, and similarly, you cannot make God appear before you just to answer your doubts. And the night before I had come to Krishna consciousness, I had prayed to Krishna, to a deity of Lord Shiva, to please help me to know what was the answer of, for everything. And then here the next day I meet Srila Prabhupada. It was so wonderful how everything happened.
So I joined the Chicago Temple in 1972, just before Janmashtami and Vyas Puja, knowing that the devotees were all going to pile in a van and go to the big festival in New Vrindavan. So they had just buzzed me up, and I went there, and we were just, all ecstatic. You're a new devotee, you were ecstatic, Prabhupada's coming. And I remember when Srila Prabhupada pulled up in the car and got out, I could feel it. It felt like in every molecule of my body, I could feel that I had been traveling all over the material universe, the higher planets, the middle planets, the lower planets, for millions and millions of lifetimes. I could just feel it. It wasn't like theoretical. I could feel it. And there he was. There he was. This was my ticket out. This was the person. My sojourn in the material world was over. And I can remember just being in complete ecstasy. My hairs were standing on end, and I was just crying like anything. And I can't even remember if I paid my obeisances. I was so stunned and bowled over, and just a feeling, such a great feeling of relief that my sojourn in the material world was over. All I had to do was follow Srila Prabhupada, and everything had been taken care of.
We were walking in Regent's Park in London with Srila Prabhupada. And actually it was perhaps the month of October or November. It was quite cold. And there had been some type of precipitation because the walkway was icy. Prabhupada had on an airline blanket, which he was using to wrap around his waist on top of his dhoti. I'm sure Prabhupada didn't steal the blanket from the airline, but somebody did. In any case, it was a type of striped blanket of some type. I believe it was striped. I forget the airline. And there was a wool blanket. He would wear that. And it was just Srila Prabhupada and myself walking. And as we were walking through the park, Prabhupada was taking his stick, and he would stop and he would smack the puddle which had frozen. And then he would walk on. Then he'd come to the next one and he'd bang, smack it, and it would shatter. And after a while, I guess he was waiting for me to ask him why he was doing that. So I asked him. And Prabhupada said, because this is not the natural condition of the water. He said, similarly, it is not our nature to be in Maya. So we must break the back, the material energy. And he said, this is not our natural condition, to be in Maya. And I remember we kept walking, and at one point there were some, I think it was some, he noticed that there was a lake of some type, and it was frozen except for the portion around the trees. And he said the Goswamis knew this secret. That's why they lived under trees. He said because a tree is warm in the winter, underneath the tree is warm in the winter and cool in the summer. He said you can see that because around the tree the water is not frozen.
Whenever Prabhupada would come back to America from foreign countries, I remember many times he would have a press conference, and he would always declare to the reporters, these are American boys and girls, I've not imported them from India. It was very important for Prabhupada to show that Krishna consciousness was being accepted by the people of that country. Similarly, one time, a GBC representative sent Prabhupada a picture of a new castle that had been rented in Geneva, Switzerland, and outside the castle there were about 30 devotees in a group photograph. He sent this to Prabhupada, a big glossy picture. Prabhupada wrote back and said, it's very nice, but I have one question. Are these local devotees, or have you brought them from somewhere else? So, of course, this is not specifically on the topic of analogy, but it shows how Prabhupada was very concerned that the local people in each place actually understand Krishna consciousness. For example, when Prabhupada went to Nairobi, when Africa was just being opened, and I remember one lecture he gave in which he urged the people not to follow the false example of the so-called developed countries. And he gave a special lecture for those people in a third world country in Africa that they should pursue another line of development according to Krishna consciousness. So this, I think, is something that can be discussed also, is how Prabhupada in so many different countries presented something which was very appropriate and meaningful to the people of that country. For example, in America, he, knowing that Americans would naturally be proud of having the most important, materially most important country, he would sometimes praise. He simultaneously praised America and pointed out the flaw by saying that you have so many achievements, but all these achievements are like zeros. The fine roads, the buildings, the prosperity. They are material achievements, but they're also zeros. But if you put the one of Krishna in front of the zeros, then these achievements become real achievements. So that was preaching for America.
And then Srila Prabhupada gave a lecture and so on and so forth. Then he went back to his apartment, and we were all ready for bed. And then the word got out, Srila Prabhupada came back. This is like 30 minutes later or so. So we all scrambled together and came into the temple room, and we were sitting there very expectantly, and Srila Prabhupada was very grave. And he said, he began by, he didn't say anything at first. He played a tape of Vande Hum with himself on the harmonium. He said, I've just received one telegram from my godbrothers at Keshav Maharaj, the person who gave me sannyas, has departed. And he said, then as he was talking, he began remembering his spiritual master. There's a cassette tape of this. And as he was speaking, there was one tear, very, very slowly came and just kind of like hovered for a little while. It was like his separation from his spiritual master. It was such a beautiful tear, just like a shining diamond. So many of us saw that and have commented on it. And then at last it fell. It was so beautiful. So Srila Prabhupada, he asked that one document be sent around the room. And this one girl, Madhavilata, was asked to take it around. So she's taking around this document to sign, to reply to the Gaudiya Math that he's received the news. And then Srila Prabhupada said, the girl, she was hesitating, like there was another guest tonight, and she wasn't going to let us sign. And Srila Prabhupada said, no, everyone here, they are all witness. So then I knew that Srila Prabhupada was accepting me in a certain way. He was accepting me as a part of something that was happening there. And it was a very wonderful experience.
So the first time I saw Srila Prabhupada in Hawaii, the Pujari had really done a great job decorating the deities. There were banana leaves and tulsi, mounds of tulsi and flowers. And so when Srila Prabhupada started the lecture, he commented how beautiful the deities looked and how wonderful a job the Pujari had done. And he said, you must do this. You must decorate the deities very nicely. And by decorating the deities, you are decorating your heart. And then he said, and if you neglect to decorate the deities, then you will be neglecting to decorate your heart. And then your heart would become black. And he goes, and that is why so many have left. And everybody was, because he said it in a very grave voice. You know, first it was very ecstatic, and that is why so many have left. And everybody got like nervous and stuff.
When we went to India with Srila Prabhupada, 1970, at the time, and leading up to that time, the Sankirtan movement had pretty much just begun, say for a year and a half, meaning active street Sankirtan. And it was done by, chanting Hare Krishna on the streets and distributing back to Godhead magazines, basically. So when we got to India, we applied the same formula. We started to chant Hare Krishna on the streets. But as soon as we did that, there was some ridicule. People were ridiculing us a bit. And there were some newspaper articles, even. And people somehow were throwing coins towards us. When Prabhupada heard this, especially the people were throwing coins, he told us, stop immediately doing daily kirtan in the streets, because people are taking it in a cheap way. Then gradually, things turned around a little bit, but it was significant that Prabhupada was willing to adjust completely a most fundamental strategy, of street chanting parties, if it did not have the desired effect. So a preacher has to be an expert judge of time, place, and circumstance. And know how to present Krishna consciousness in an effective way for the local population. And it may be, one formula may be, totally unsuitable. And Prabhupada did really know how to decide which formula was suitable to which place. I think that was one of Prabhupada's most outstanding qualities. He wasn't a stereotyped thinker. He used to say, it's spiritual life is not static, it's ecstatic. His pun on that word, it's ecstatic. And he was always thinking of, brilliant, unique ways to spread Krishna consciousness.
When I was Prabhupada's secretary in Mayapur, Sridham Mayapur, 1976, I think in February, just before the annual meeting, Prabhupada told me several jokes. He told one joke about the Indian servant of a British lord who only knew 3 English words, which were yes, no, very well.
Very good.
Very good. So what happened is that one Indian was a servant of a British lord and had to leave the service, so he convinced his friend to take over the service. You heard the joke also. And so the friend protested, I don't know English. How can I serve this British lord? He said, you only have to know 3 words. Yes, no, very good. He said, if you know that, that's enough. So one time, so he took the job. So one time there was something missing. So the British lord accosted the servant and said, did you take this object? He said, yes. No. So, will you give it back? No. So I'm going to call the police. Very good.
After being with Srila Prabhupada in his room for 2 hours, and there were so many things that happened, then I went into tears. And I said, okay, I'm leaving ISKCON. I'm leaving this movement. I can't take it anymore. I can't become pure like that. I can't become a pure devotee. And so the Narayana and Jai Gopal, they said, you're right. This is not an ascending process. You can't do it. But Srila Prabhupada is so great that he can make a devotee even out of you. And that one glorification of Srila Prabhupada, thank you Narayana, has kept me all these years.
So I arrived in Hawaii around Gaur Purnima time, and we knew Srila Prabhupada was coming in May. So I immediately set out to learn everything I could possibly learn about Hawaii, knowing that when Prabhupada would come, he would regularly ask devotees questions about the place he was visiting. So I learned all about Hawaii's history, the hotels, the beaches, you name it, I knew it. I was Mr. Hawaii. So I was learning everything I could, and I was just like knowing that one day I'll be on the walk with Prabhupada, and he'll ask a question, and I'll just be able to step right up and go, well, Prabhupada, that was da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So one day we were walking on Waikiki Beach, and I was walking right behind Srila Prabhupada in his actual footsteps, because they would leave an impression in the sand, and I was thinking, you don't get an opportunity like this in millions of lifetimes. So I was just very carefully walking there. I looked to see exactly where his footprint was, and I'd walk right in it, walking, and I'm thinking, Prabhupada's going to ask a question, I'm going to know the answer. Prabhupada's going to ask a question, I'm going to know the answer. I'm going to be the man, right? And then all of a sudden, Srila Prabhupada stopped, and he turned right around, and he was looking right at me. He was very close. I mean, his eyes and everything were looking. And without looking, he pointed like this. He goes, what is that? And I looked over, and I had no idea what it was. I was shaking, and I felt about 1 inch tall, and I was on the hellish planets, and my entire life was ruined. And like in the distance, it was like far away practically, because I wasn't there practically. I could hear somebody going, Prabhupada, that's a device that measures how far a person has walked. And Prabhupada was still looking at me. He says, so they should make a device that tells how far death is, but that they cannot do. And then he finished looking at me, and he turned around and kept walking. And I think by then I had like recovered a little. and my pride had been completely eliminated. My pride had been very eliminated, and I was actually in ecstasy, thinking Prabhupada had mystic powers. He knew everything I was thinking. He knew I learned all about Hawaii. He knew I wanted to ask a question, and he knew I thought I was going to impress him. So I understood you don't want to show off in front of your spiritual master. So I was really impressed with Prabhupada's mystic powers, the philosophy and his teachings, and also his sense of humor. That I had been chastised, but it was humorous. And at the same time, he instructed all the devotees about how, you can't measure how far death is. And that's the big thing that, that you should know, is how far death is at any moment.
Another time when we were in India, Prabhupada was actually quite upset because some of his, or one godbrother or some godbrothers were critical of our sannyasis because they didn't speak Sanskrit or they couldn't read Sanskrit. Prabhupada said, where does it say anywhere that one must be able to read Sanskrit to go back to Godhead? Where does it say that? He's quite adamant about this. And he said, my disciples may be, it was at the same time, he said, my disciples may be disqualified in so many ways. He said, but one qualification they have, he was speaking to some Indian people in Vrindavan who were gathered in his room. He said, but one qualification they have, he said, whatever I tell them to do, they will do it. They have full faith in whatever I say. So, I appreciated the point because compared with the gentlemen who were sitting there were many gentlemen and saintly persons, we certainly were not qualified in so many ways in terms of etiquette. And Prabhupada in fact said that. He said, I know often they make mistakes in terms of etiquette. He said, but whatever I tell them to do, they will do. So our good fortune was that we were following the Lord's pure devotee. And, despite all disqualifications, that one qualification surpassed every good qualification anyone else might have.
So one night, Srila Prabhupada called for us to come and visit him in his quarters at 26 2nd Avenue. In other words, Srila Prabhupada's apartment, where he's staying, is at 26 2nd Avenue. But the new temple is a block or two down the street at 61 2nd Avenue. So we all knew the history and the privilege of seeing Srila Prabhupada at 26 2nd Avenue, so it was really wonderful. So Rukmini and Saradiya and I, we were on our way, but Saradiya at the last minute decided she didn't want to come. There was some practical thing with her laundry or something like that. So Rukmini and I, the minute that we walk in through the door, Srila Prabhupada said, where is Saradiya? And the second we just come in the door, he says, where is Saradiya? And then we understood that Srila Prabhupada was very concerned for each of his daughters, where they were, how they were being engaged, how they were feeling, because there were some feelings there also for why she had stayed back.
And then also Prabhupada said that the dresser and the cleanser are the same. He said it didn't matter. One shouldn't think that because he's dressing the deity or because he's a manager, he's more important than the person who's actually washing the pots or cleaning the temple. He said the dresser and the cleanser, they are the same. We're all serving Krishna, and Krishna sees every devotee's service equally.
This story, I think, illustrates how Prabhupada had a completely personal, individual relationship with each disciple, and what was appropriate for one person, maybe not for another, depending on the special relationship each had with Prabhupada. One time we were walking on the beach in Los Angeles, Venice Beach, and there was an intelligent young Indian boy that Prabhupada was obviously trying to cultivate and bring into the Krishna consciousness movement. So the boy came apparently from a good Hindu background, and as Prabhupada was speaking, he would occasionally quote some Sanskrit from the Bhagavad Gita, and Prabhupada would give him tremendous praise. Well, that's very nice, so you know that verse, very good, it's very good. And Prabhupada was encouraging him very much to quote these Gita verses. So I began to think, boy, this boy is getting so much attention and mercy from Prabhupada by quoting Gita verses. I know Gita verses. So I began to think, I want to get some of this mercy myself. But of course, this boy was just an outsider that Prabhupada was trying to cultivate. I was supposed to be Prabhupada's, trusted son. To make a long story short, as we were driving back, we were a couple of blocks away from the temple, I said, Prabhupada said something, I said, oh yes, Prabhupada, that reminds me of the Bhagavad Gita verse. And I quoted the Sanskrit. So Prabhupada just turned around and gave me this look and said, there are so many verses. And so that's the last time I ever tried that one.
Srila Prabhupada said, I had no reason to leave Vrindavan to come here. And we all were wondering why Srila Prabhupada had said that. It was almost as though there was a change, that something was going on, and that we had displeased him or something. It was such a heavy thing for him to say. And then he said, and you have no reason to come here to see me, except Krishna. And it was so beautiful, the way that smile came up, and he said that. He said, and then he looked at all of our eyes, and he went right around the room. He said, I want that each of you open a center. And he said, this Krishna consciousness must go all over the world. So later in that darshan, then, Rukmini asked, well, does that mean women too? And Srila Prabhupada said, yes. And then he mentioned the person that I was named after, Jahnava Mata. And he said that she had been a great preacher in Krishna consciousness.
He was in Australia on his way back to India, and he sent me a telegram. You preach if Mass, I preach if class. That's all it said. Because I described to him about a Pandal program, a large outdoor public program that we were arranging for like 10 days or something, and he just, and I said, would you do it? Are you willing to do it so we can advertise? And he said, that was the telegram. You preach if Mass, I preach if class.
Oh, one thing that Prabhupada said about to Sudama Maharaj, this was before I got to Hawaii, but the devotees always it was like a big quote for the devotees, was that Prabhupada had told Sudama Maharaj about the devotees could maintain their health by going swimming every day in the ocean. And Sudama Maharaj freaked out because that would mean the devotees would go swimming all day. They wouldn't just take a dip and come out. They would go swimming all day, and he was like, Prabhupada, no. So Prabhupada said, okay, but at least once a week they must go swimming. So probably, it was very joyful in Hawaii. It was very, very pleasant. But as I said, Prabhupada regularly tried to keep us, remind us of we're still in the material world, even though we were on a heavenly planet, and to pay attention to doing our service and not get too distracted by the heavenly pleasures.
Gargamuni's introduced to Srila Prabhupada, we have just begun spiritual sky incense. So then Srila Prabhupada said, so Birbhadra, he's this little 12-year-old servant, like that. Birbhadra, you should work, or maybe it was Girish, it was one of the two boys. He said, you should work for Gargamuni. And Gargamuni, you should pay something to Birbhadra. And so we're all astounded. Here's a little boy that's going to be getting money. And the little boy, he's like beaming, I'm going to have money, even if it's $5, it's more than any brahmachari had at that time, So Srila Prabhupada reiterates it again. He says, so you will work for Gargamuni, and Gargamuni will pay something to Birbhadra. So it just deepens it, and then Srila Prabhupada said it again, and he said, and Birbhadra, you give the money to me. And then the look on his face, Birbhadra's face, we're all laughing. So I wanted to be a part of that kind of atmosphere. Everything's light and joyful and intimate, and I wanted to be part of that. So I asked Srila Prabhupada, Swamiji, when I chant Hare Krishna, can I pray for all living entities? And Srila Prabhupada answered me, You know all living entities? You know all living entities? No, you pray to Krishna and you let Krishna take care of all living entities.
Prabhupada gave Gayatri Mantra. First, I think he did it first in Boston, and then he came to San Francisco and gave some of us Gayatri Mantra. It was September 1968. So, he gave out a sheet with the Gayatri Mantras after teaching us how to chant. Anyway, Hrdayananda was having some difficulty pronouncing the mantras, so he decided that he should go and ask Srila Prabhupada how to properly pronounce the mantras. So he took me along with him. And we sat down in front of Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada told him to go ahead and try to pronounce the mantras. And as Jahnava tried to pronounce the mantras, Prabhupada just leaned back and started roaring with laughter. And Prabhupada just shook his head and said, it's hopeless. He said, but it doesn't matter. He said, because you're so sincere, Krishna will accept it. Krishna will accept your chanting.
I was putting on the garland regularly on Prabhupada. It seemed like nobody caught on that, it looked, because I just knew from the first day Paramahansa Swami let me put it on that there doesn't seem to be like a real structure here. So I would regularly make sure I got the garland and put it on Prabhupada. And nobody said anything. Nobody said, who do you think, So then a devotee was telling me this ecstatic story how he made the sandalwood paste up. And how he ground it, and he added camphor to make it cooling, and added saffron so it would be a nice orange color. And then he told me how he put it on. So okay, exactly. I had him tell me it. Okay, you do this, and then you add the saffron, and then you add the camphor. Okay, great. And then how you put it on, it was like he said, duh, duh, duh. So I was ready, and I was very proud. I'd been putting the garland on, and I was thinking, now I'm putting the sandalwood paste on. I was very proud of my position. I'm putting the sandalwood paste on Prabhupada. So I went and I worked, I did it diligently. Put the right amount of camphor in so it was cooling and made it the right consistency so it wouldn't drip, right? And so I had it ready and I put it on Prabhupada. And Prabhupada got a cross look in his face. And he just turned his head and he didn't say anything. But I understood that it was supposed to be put on his temples. That was more important than the forehead. So then I was shaking, but somehow or another I got it on Prabhupada's temples. And then I paid my obeisances. And while I was down there, I was again thinking, my pride had been squished. I was on the hellish planets. But as I was getting up, I was actually in complete ecstasy that I had been chastised by my spiritual master. And that was mercy too. Not just praising you was mercy, but even the chastisement was great mercy, and that my pride had actually been curbed, and I was actually in ecstasy that I'd been chastised, and I never get an ecstasy if I'm chastised. So it was instructive and it was sweet.
Bharadwaj and I were called to Srila Prabhupada's room. Srila Prabhupada, we were going to talk to Srila Prabhupada about painting for the Krishna book. So I came in, and Bharadwaj was already speaking to Srila Prabhupada. So Srila Prabhupada turns to me the minute that I come in and said, so, in the middle of the conversation, so, what was the conclusion of Einstein at the end of his life? And this is the most amazing thing, because I'm not a scholar, and I don't know anything. But I knew the answer to that question. And so I said that there is a higher consciousness. That because of the order of the universe, this implies a higher being. So Srila Prabhupada said, yes, and then he turned back and continued speaking to Bharadwaj. And this is exactly like what happened to Brahmatirtha, in which Srila Prabhupada asked him the meaning of this verse that he had just quoted in Sanskrit or something like that. And what is the translation or something like that? And Brahmatirtha from his college days, out of the 700 verses of the Bhagavad Gita, that was the only one that he had memorized. So he was able to quote it to Srila Prabhupada. So Srila Prabhupada does this. And then so Srila Prabhupada's talking, and he begins to telling Krishna book stories. Now, for us, actually, we'd never heard of these stories before. We're getting them on the tapes. But Srila Prabhupada now, he's going to tell us stories that we've never heard before. And he's saying that Lord Krishna, he was such a naughty boy. Oh, he also said that to me. He said, a naughty boy is an intelligent boy. I was naughty when I was a little boy, and so was Lord Krishna, and so was Lord Chaitanya. And so then he's talking about how naughty Lord Krishna is. He says he used to go and he used to pass urine on the clean floor, and then he'd go on it, and Srila Prabhupada went like that. Of course, in the book it says spit, but Srila Prabhupada went like that. And then Srila Prabhupada begins telling the story about the universal form, the universe being contained within the mouth of the universe being contained within the mouth of Lord Krishna when Mother Yashoda opens his mouth. So Srila Prabhupada begins to describe it, and he begins to describe how there were oceans and seas, and there was air and fire and earth and water and the 10 directions, north, south, east and west, mountains, and Srila Prabhupada goes on like this for about 5 minutes. And Bharadwaj and I were, as he's speaking, and in this wonderful, charismatic way, we're gradually leaning forward, unbeknownst to us, as we're involved in this story like this. And then at one point, Srila Prabhupada said to Bharadwaj, "Now you paint that!" And it was such a shock. It was a double shock, because we hadn't expected Srila Prabhupada. We were coming in, and we weren't expecting Srila Prabhupada to do something sudden like that. And also, it was a shock of how to paint it. So Bharadwaj almost fell over backwards, almost lost his balance. And I also fell completely backwards too, like we were just, physically, we were shocked by what Srila Prabhupada had said. So months later, Bharadwaj was up in Montreal and really struggling with how to paint this picture. So then he writes to Srila Prabhupada and said, "Srila Prabhupada, in all due honesty, I cannot figure it out, how to put all those things in Krishna's mouth." So then Srila Prabhupada sent back a little sketch, and it shows a stick figure of Mother Yashoda standing up. It shows a little stick figure of baby Krishna, of little child Krishna sitting down, and it shows a balloon coming out of his mouth. He said, that's how you do it. And then Bharadwaj did this beautiful, beautiful painting that's in the original Krishna book of all these things in Krishna's mouth. And that painting is now hanging in the foyer of the Montreal temple.
How Prabhupada is so learned. We're told that Prabhupada, first of all, Prabhupada is an intimate associate of Krishna. So Dadami Buddha Yogam Tam, Krishna gives the intelligence to his surrendered devotee. And I think the first answer is that it's by the grace of Krishna. Prabhupada knew everything because he knew Krishna. He knew exactly when to quote a particular verse, and that was appropriate at the time. We were also told that Prabhupada did study Bhagavatam during his Grihastha ashram, for example, for 4 hours every day. I heard this. And I also heard, talking to Prabhupada's son, Vrindavan Chandra, who told me that Prabhupada used to personally worship Radha Krishna deities. He would not only worship the deity in the morning by waking the deity, offering arti, bathing the deity, but he would also cook for the deity personally, and he would also sew the deity's clothing. In other words, he really took care of those deities. So Prabhupada, he did many things. One point is that what we know of Srila Prabhupada, we know from what we saw of him after he came to America, but we don't know everything that happened before that, and we certainly, as Prabhupada said, you are seeing me, but actually, in other words, Prabhupada has his, how Krishna and he are related is something which So Prabhupada was able to hear from Krishna everything he needed to know. I think it's not only, it's, on the one hand, I'm trying to say that it's both a question of his studying, but at the same time it's also a question of Krishna's revelation to Prabhupada. I don't think it's one or the other, but it's a combination of both.
I guess either because I was a Sankirtan leader, I had distributed more books than anybody, they were going to let me bathe Srila Prabhupada's feet. And I remember Prabhupada's feet were actually swollen. And I felt like, Prabhupada, I could feel that Prabhupada had gone through so many, it wasn't like he was touring around the world enjoying. Prabhupada was giving his life so that we would have life in Krishna consciousness. And I also remember when I was pouring and I was just in complete ecstasy and somebody behind me goes, hurry up, hurry up. And I got all nervous and I hurried up. And after that, anytime anybody said anything, I just totally was oblivious to whatever they were saying. It was like, this will only happen once, twice, 3 times in your life that you could get this close to Prabhupada and just get this mercy and forget what anybody said. I remember one time I had made the sandalwood paste up and I was ready to put it on Prabhupada, and Tamal Krsna came and he took it from me and he put the sandalwood paste on Prabhupada. And I was thinking, who does he think he is? I made that up. So I remember the next day, it was it just became transcendental rascals to get Prabhupada's mercy. I had my big chadar on, and I had the sandalwood paste and flour underneath, and I was just standing there, and I saw Tamal, and he looked all over. He was looking all over for the sandalwood paste, and finally he gave up, and he offered Prabhupada a flower, and he paid us obeisances. Boom! My chadar went off. I had the sandalwood paste, and I put it on Prabhupada. And I remember Prabhupada was smiling. I think he knew what I did. And I was really attached to that chadar because when we were in India with Srila Prabhupada, we went to Haridas Thakur's Bhajan Kutir or something. And while we were there, somebody came, I think it was Guru Das, came out and said, Prabhupada needs something to sit on. Prabhupada needs something to sit on. That chadar came off, and it was like, here. And then later they gave it back to me, and I was thinking, this is the chadar Prabhupada sat on. And I can't remember exactly what Prabhupada said in that. Oh, actually, I do remember. Prabhupada gave the lecture in another language, in Indian language. And we had no clue as to what he was saying. But I remember sitting right at Prabhupada's feet and looking at Prabhupada's feet and looking up at Prabhupada talk and thinking, well, I'm getting purified because I'm listening, it's going in and I'm being purified even though I don't understand anything Prabhupada is saying. And that was also very sweet, just to be, because usually you didn't get that close in India to Prabhupada. That time I guess I was able to get close and get some personal service in there. But in Hawaii it was very intimate. You could get close, and you could pull tricks like that, hide the sandalwood paste from Tamal Krishna, put it on yourself.
One story which shows Prabhupada's extreme tolerance. In 1972 in New Vrindavan, on Vyas Puja Day, we had the Vyas Puja ceremony in a special pavilion set up there. Were you there in 1972? And they'd cooked a very large cake for Srila Prabhupada and a great feast. So what happened is that somehow the word got around falsely that the cake and even the feast was Mahaprasadam. The Prabhupada had tasted it. And of course there was a type of devotional feeding frenzy. Naturally all the devotees were mad after getting some of this Mahaprasadam on Prabhupada's Vyas Puja Day. So I drove Prabhupada back in my little car. That's another funny story. I was just a new sannyasi, and the GBCs and managers had made arrangements who would drive Prabhupada in this big car. And so actually right after the Vyas Puja ceremony, somehow or other, Prabhupada's car didn't show up there to take him back to his house, which was a couple of miles up through the hills. And so somehow or other, Krishna inspired me. This is my chance. Sort of like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. That this was my chance. So I had my car nearby. I was a new sannyasi, and I had a little yellow Volkswagen Bug, a little yellow Volkswagen. So I raced to my car and turned the ignition and came around right in front of the stage where Prabhupada was, and I ran out, opened the door, and said, Srila Srila Prabhupada, we can go now. So, anyway, one of the, I won't mention the name, but one of the big leaders was absolutely infuriated by this. But Prabhupada did get in the car, and off we went. And it was actually, thinking back on it, it was, I can't imagine a more sublime experience. On Prabhupada's Vyas Puja day, driving him alone through the forests and the hills like that. And so we drove a few miles up to Prabhupada's house, and then and actually, as we pulled in, that leader had somehow gotten up there, and he was sort of making faces and sort of cursing me so that Prabhupada couldn't see it, you know. But I thought, well, you know, I got the mercy, and Prabhupada didn't have to wait. So anyway, so then we went into Prabhupada's house, and he said, "Where's the lunch?" And then he was informed that mistakenly the devotees had thought it was already Mahaprasadam, and there was actually, on Prabhupada's birthday, Vyas Puja day, there was no prasadam for lunch. And so Prabhupada's servant immediately said, well, I'll go cook again, and so he began to cook, but Prabhupada was totally undisturbed, not angry at all. And not to say that he would never become angry. He was soft as a rose and hard as a thunderbolt, like Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself, but in that particular occasion, he was actually very peaceful and happy, and then we just talked for a while until finally the lunch was cooked.
I was a Sankirtan leader, so that meant I kept the book room. It was supposed to be kept in order, and I'm a very sloppy person. So I knew where the books were, but as far as like really having it straightened out and organized, and you know, there are empty boxes around and like those yellow things that get wrapped around them. And so it was kind of messy. And then one day we heard Prabhupada's doing an inspection of the temple, and I was like, oh no. And I ran to the book room. I didn't even go on the first part of the inspection because I was like, oh no. So I got in there and I'm like stacking books up and busting boxes up and throwing stuff in the trash. And then I started sweeping, so it was all clean. And I just got done sweeping when Prabhupada got to the door, and he was looking at me. And I didn't know. I don't even think I paid my obeisances. I may or may not have. All I remember was Prabhupada was looking at me, and I was frozen. And then I heard Prabhupada asking, "What is this?" And Shruti Kiri, "Oh, this is the book room, Srila Prabhupada." And then Prabhupada looked at me, and this time it was eye contact, and I could understand that Prabhupada knew that I had just finished cleaning that book room, and that regularly it was a mess, and those were his books, and that his book room should not be a mess. And after that, I pretty much firmly resolved that the book room would always be clean and always be straightened out, so that if Prabhupada was going on a walk, I'd be all right. I could actually take the walk with him, and not have to run to the book room and be like, oh no.
This incident takes place in Boston at the airport in 1969. And Bhagavan is there, Kirtanananda is there, Brahmananda is there. Everyone has come from all these different centers. And Brahmananda is instructing us, now everybody, you have to behave in a certain way. Previously, you jump over chairs at the airport, it's not good. We have to have some kind of protocol of an etiquette, how we handle ourselves in public. This is PR. So everybody's behaving themselves very nicely. And then after a long wait, we see Srila Prabhupada's bead bag up above the customs, some kind of customs wall. We can see it. Srila Prabhupada's. And when Kirtanananda saw this bead bag going like this, he lost it. With his danda, he goes flying and jumping. And all of us went flying and jumping. I'm sorry, but that's all we could do. And then Srila Prabhupada came out and he was beaming. And we were all just bowing down as he was coming. And then there was just like a whole sea of us bowing down. First there was a path of us bowing down, and then There's a whole sea of us bowing down. Meanwhile, there are all these newspaper reporters and, with their cameras and so on and so forth, and they're looking at all this sea of Americans in 1969 bowing down to this Indian sannyasi. Srila Prabhupada notes it. And he said, so, the spiritual master is to be worshipped as God. Can't hear a pin drop in that part of the airport. But if the spiritual master thinks that he is God, then he is dog. And then he had him. He had him.
One time Prabhupada gave me a laddu. I think I told the story last time, yeah. A luglu, actually. It wasn't a laddu, it was a luglu, as Prabhupada called them. Anyway, and he asked me what my impression of it was, and I tasted it, and I just couldn't believe the taste. I said, it's not of this world. Prabhupada said, you're right. He said, this is the same recipe that Mother Yasoda cooks for Krishna when he goes out to tend the cows, and Krishna likes them so much that he keeps extra in his pockets so that he can eat them throughout the day. And when Prabhupada was speaking, it was very clear to me that it was Mother Yasoda's recipe, and Prabhupada knew it very well.
I remember they used to say, there's only one question you should ask the spiritual master, and that's, how may I serve you? And I figured, well, I already knew how I was supposed to serve him, distributing books, taking care of the temple, cleaning, cooking. There was like, what do I need to ask him? How may I serve you? So, but when I was in Chicago, I had been on Guru Kripa's party, and they used to do Ganesh worship. So I came back, and I was doing I wanted to do Ganesh worship, and I told all the Sankirtan devotees, they're collecting so much money there by doing Ganesh puja, right? And so the devotees all got into it. The temple president found out about it, told us we had to stop. We didn't listen to him. They got the GBC involved. We said, oh, who's the GBC? He doesn't know anything. The Swamis are doing it. So that was like the first question I asked Srila Prabhupada was, could I do Ganesh puja? And I didn't mention anything about money. I just mentioned it says in the Nectar Devotion that you should worship Ganesh, and things like that. And this is how the mantras they used and stuff. And could we do that? And then Prabhupada wrote back, my dear sons, because all the Sankirtan devotees signed it. So Prabhupada wrote back, my dear sons, please accept my blessings. And I remember when we were sitting around reading it, we were all like, that's it. Our lives are perfect. Prabhupada's given us his blessings. And then as we read further, Prabhupada was talking about how Krishna says just to worship him, and you're proposing to worship a demigod. Why is this? Krishna says you're less intelligent if you do this, right? And we wouldn't have taken that from anyone. But we were just in ecstasy. Prabhupada told us that. And then Prabhupada went on to say, but still, if you're attached to worshiping Ganesh, and it's I got the letter, and it says, and it says, for huge amounts of Lakshmi, and then penciled in, to serve Krishna, then you please send me $100,000 a month and not a single farthing less. So I thought that was a very nice instruction, and we were all like, we stopped our Ganesh puja and went out on Sankirtan, and nobody else could have told us that. But Prabhupada told us that, and we were in ecstasy.
Parikit said to Srila Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, should we attend classes? Because what was happening at that time was Bharadwaj was taking the artists over to the Los Angeles County Art Museum, and we were studying the art and making sketches and so on and so forth, and he was giving us sketching classes and so on and so forth. Srila Prabhupada said, yes. And Parikit said, but I mean, and Srila Prabhupada said, yes, morning and evening classes, and Parikit interrupted him and said, but I mean, and Srila Prabhupada interrupted him and said, but I mean morning and evening classes. And then at that time he said, by your attending these classes, then you will please the Lord from within your heart, and you will receive instructions from within as Paramatma.
I was with Prabhupada when we made some of the recordings. He made some of the recordings, which are, we listened to bhajans. And it was quite wonderful to watch Prabhupada record. First, he would play the harmonium, And, well, when I was there, I'd play the kartals, or if I wasn't there, someone else would, very gently, and try to keep the rhythm, because there was no mridanga. Because after he would record the harmonium and the kartals, then he would put on the headphones, and he would listen to the recording and just play the mridanga to accompany himself. So a lot of these tapes are Prabhupada playing harmonium and mridanga. And Prabhupada was an expert musician. I heard that, I think it's mentioned in perhaps in the Lamrita, but anyway, it said that when the recording engineer heard the chanting what Prabhupada did on the Happening album, first Hare Krishna album, the man said it was, Prabhupada was uncanny, that where Prabhupada was had perfect pitch. Perfect pitch. When the recording engineer was very, very impressed with Prabhupada's voice.
And I had heard another time, Prabhupada had a unique ability to do that, to chastise people or, point out your folly or, your lowness or whatever. And because it came from Prabhupada and the way he said it, you didn't take any offense. You just felt like, oh, okay. And they said one time Prabhupada was walking in Hawaii, and he had said this before, that because the people ate so many pigs, they were looking like pigs. And they were walking by some Hawaiians when they said it. And the people heard it. And so they were like, they wanted to talk to Prabhupada about that. And then Prabhupada started talking to them about how they're the soul and they're not their body. And as he was talking to them, they were happy. And they walked away and they realized Prabhupada wasn't making an offense about them. They were totally enveloped in Prabhupada's love and his spiritual instruction that you're not the body, and this is just, the bodies look different. Different people, you have different kinds of bodies. And they walked away quite happy. They weren't all offended, and we were thinking, only Prabhupada can do things like this. And we said anything like that, it'd be a riot.
Just a few months after I took sannyas, I was in Los Angeles with Prabhupada and staying underneath his quarters in a sort of small room without windows that was in those days reserved for the sannyasis. And I remember at that particular time, for a few days I was feeling actually discouraged because I was thinking that I'm not a very good devotee. How will I ever become a good devotee? And I was just sort of feeling a little morose like that. How will I ever come to the proper standard of serving Prabhupada? So I was in that mood, and every day Prabhupada would come down the stairs to go out to the garden. He would, the Los Angeles Temple, New Dwarka, he would come down the stairs and then walk straight to the back there of the building and then along that little walkway to his garden. So this day that I was feeling somewhat morose, Prabhupada, without saying a word, simply came by my room, opened the door, came in the room. Of course, I immediately offered obeisances. I just walked in, looked around like this, and then continued his way. So I understood that he was calling me. So I immediately got up and ran behind him, without saying a word. So I walked behind Prabhupada out to the garden. And actually that day we were just alone. His servant, of course, walked with him out to the garden, somehow went to do something, and because I was there. And so I just sat there alone with Prabhupada. Again, I had been in that mood of being somewhat discouraged, and so Prabhupada began to preach to me in a very sweet, gentle way. And what was unique about this preaching is, he was lifting my spirits, that he would never say Krishna or God, he kept saying the Father. And of course, he was also the Father, but he simply began saying that actually the Father wants you to be happy. And what does the Father want? He simply wants to see that you're happy, but you have to also serve the Father. And he began preaching for about 15 minutes, only using the word the Father. And it was a very compassionate, of course, completely entered my heart and lifted me out of all these doldrums. And I became, again, very enthusiastic. It was very kind preaching. And so for the next few days, every day, because I was sort of trying to practice the principle of not trying to enjoy the guru. And so I would just stay in my room, and every day in the afternoon, on his way out to the garden, he would walk in, again, just walk into my room, just right through the door, and just sort of look around, and turn on his heels and walk out. And every day I would run behind him.
One time he actually, as far as I remember, he said it both times he was in Hawaii. He talked about the surfers. And he would go, you say surfer, I say sufferer. And every devotee was a surfer. Tell me, Prabhupada looked right at him when he said it. You know, and which I kind of got a kick out of because I was thinking, well, how many surfers there were? And they all say it. Prabhupada was looking right at him when he said that. You say surfer, I say sufferer.
One thing that I always remember is how Prabhupada once laughed at me. I mean, he laughed at me quite a few times, but this is one time where we're in Calcutta. We had just arrived. And, you know, I don't know if I mentioned, I was traveling with, the whole party was sannyasis. Did I mention it? Except for myself. At the time, I was a grihasta, and the whole entourage of Srila Prabhupada consists of sannyasis. You know, Hrdayananda Swami, Madhavisa Swami, Devananda Swami, Kartikeya Swami, and Tamal Krishna Das Adhikari. So I had enlisted myself, you know, Prabhupada had just formed the GBC, and because I was there, I immediately grabbed the zone that I knew Prabhupada was going to. And it was just a smart move to get to be with Prabhupada. Little did I know what it was all about, GBC, and then I didn't know what I was setting myself up for. But it was the right move, because for the next 4 years, 8 months of the year, Prabhupada was practically, I think 8 months of the year, on average, he was in India. So it was the right move. But I had to pay for it. But anyway, I started paying as soon as we arrived in Calcutta, because Prabhupada instituted the Life Membership Program. And little did I know that, you know, when you keep accounts in India, it's for real. You know, when you keep accounts in America, it's not really, now it's for real, but in those days, we were so small that it didn't matter what we would have done or didn't do. And anyway, we were tax exempt. But in India, you know, everything's for real. You have to keep track of every paisa, literally. So, you know, Prabhupada he instituted the Life Membership Program, money started to come in, and, you know, someone had to keep the counts, and someone had to keep tabs on who the members were, and issue receipts, and print up membership books. And every time I try to get someone to help, they say, I'm a sannyasi. I'm a sannyasi. You know, I play the harmonium. Every one of them was doing something. I'm practicing harmonium, but nobody was supposed to do anything because they were sannyasis. So finally, I was going out of my wits, you know. I just couldn't, I went mad. After about 2 weeks of this, I ran the Prabhupada and I just broke down. I said, I can't take it anymore. He said, you know, what's wrong? I said, I can't take it anymore. I said, nobody's helping me do anything. I have to do everything. And Prabhupada looked at me, and what I never expected, he just started laughing at me. You know, and I was crying, and he was laughing. So he started laughing, and then he said, this is the same position Arjuna found himself in. He said, Arjuna found himself in the same position. He said, this is very good. You know, I was hoping for sympathy. I was hoping for some assistance, at least some sympathy. Instead, Prabhupada starts laughing at me, telling me it's very good. So, you know, I stopped crying, but I mean, I was trying to figure out why it was very good. And he said, we should pray for this situation. He said, we should pray to be so constantly engaged in Krishna's service that Maya cannot find any means to enter. I said, this is very fortunate. Then, you know, once he told that story about an Indian train. Said, if you've ever, especially if you go on a train in India, like I used to have to go constantly from Mayapur to Calcutta. It's a local train, and it's packed. And I mean, you know, you have to go to countries like India or China to know what the word packed is like. Or maybe South America, they get packed up there also. But let's say any third world country, you know what the word packed means. So Prabhupada told a story about, you know, how you're sitting on a train and you have a nice seat. And this little skinny guy comes up, you know, and he's looking, you know, trying to figure out how he's going to sit down next to you, right? And, you know, you just try to make believe you're not seeing him. But you know exactly what he wants. He wants to sit down. There is no room. But eventually, you know, he just sort of smiles at you, and then plops down, and he wiggles around and gets in between you and the next person. So then you sort of like, you sort of, you have to make some room. And then suddenly, he calls over his little kid. And he sort of pushes you. He gets his kid down. And, you're moving towards the edge of the seat. And then he brings another kid, and he gets 3 or 4 kids. And then he's got this huge fat wife. And then she comes, and then you just get up and give up your seat. And it all started because, you maybe had a little sympathy and let this guy get in. And Prabhupada said, in this way, if you allow Maya to even an inch to enter, she knows how to come in and take over everything.
Then there's another incident. It was in L.A. in 1975. And Srila Prabhupada was making a tour of all of the LA community. So he comes to the art department, and we had just whitewashed the walls and everything and tried to make this dumpy-looking place look nice for Srila Prabhupada. And he's sitting down, and the room is packed. I think my husband got in there too. It was, really, you were privileged to be able to be in that room because there was so little room. And somehow or another, I was already in there, so I was lucky. So Srila Prabhupada is making no comment. And there's a picture very prominently displayed by Jairam. But Srila Prabhupada makes no comment. So then Rameshwara says, Srila Prabhupada, Jairam did this beautiful painting of Radha and Krishna. He wants, Srila Prabhupada. That meant a lot to me. I was really contemplating that one. I contemplated that one a lot. Srila Prabhupada knew us so well. And it wasn't very long after that that Jairam actually left the movement and started painting for the Scientologists. And the symptoms were already in full swing that he would be leaving us. And Srila Prabhupada just, like that. And then Maharaj was saying, Srila Prabhupada, when I go to India with these artists for the Mayapur festival, I also want your permission to take them on a tour of India. And we will be taking sketches in all the holy places to make our paintings much more authentic. Srila Prabhupada said, and as I'm painting today, this is one of my mantras. Srila Prabhupada said, we are not archaeologists. And then he went further and he was explaining how all of this inspiration that we have comes from Paramatma as we advance in devotional service. But we are not archaeologists.
And I know on the Big Island, they used to have a farm on the Big Island. And Prabhupada asked the devotees there, he said, what grows easily here? And they said, Prabhupada, we can grow cauliflower and broccoli and this and that. And they started telling him all the things they could grow. And Prabhupada said, no. What grows without any work? And devotees said, well, corn and guavas, Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said, very good. Guava juice prasadam for breakfast, corn chapatis for lunch, business finished, rest of the time chant Hare Krishna. I don't think any devotees thought they could do that. Another time Prabhupada told the devotees that they could live on 2 dabs a day. He told us that the dabs were very healthy and that you could actually live on 2 dabs a day. Of course, I don't think anybody tried to do that either. But Prabhupada, it was fun because Prabhupada would make comments that really applied to being right there, as well as instructive things. And then he also told us, because the geckos would make their sound, and Prabhupada said, oh, when you hear this, you know the truth is being spoken. So we got all kinds, in Hawaii, we got all kinds of little goodies like that. Little things that we thought were like special to Hawaii and special to the islands and the devotees there.
He also confirmed in 1977 at his Vyas Puja, I was enumerating Prabhupada's, just a few of Prabhupada's outstanding accomplishments. And at one point he said, yes, he said, whatever I'm doing now, he said, I am simply doing he said, I learned from the time when I was a child from my father. He said, everything except one thing, book publishing. That I learned from my Guru Maharaj. And it's interesting that when I gave this lecture, because actually it was interesting, Vyas Puja, because Prabhupada was ill, but so basically the Vyas Puja glorification section was my talk. And somehow Prabhupada, Krishna empowered me actually to speak for 45 minutes on that day about Prabhupada. And it wasn't, Prabhupada just had me speak. It was in London. And 3 times only Prabhupada interrupted. And each time it was to say something about, and my Guru Maharaj ordered me to print books, or and my Guru Maharaj ordered me to publish books, 3 times he interrupted my lecture to insert this point, that my Guru Maharaj ordered me to publish books and distribute books. 3 times. Everything else was fine about the lecture, but somehow he wanted 3 times more emphasis on the book distribution. Very interesting.
Also, Prabhupada, he actually finished the 5th canto and the 7th canto in Hawaii, and he started the 6th canto and he started the 8th canto. And he, I can't remember which Bhagavatams it's in, but when he finished it, he said, by the mercy of Shri Shri Panchatattva, and he listed the devotees' names. I mean, the Panchatattva's names. And then in the 8th canto, he starts out talking about how that he has faithfully been trying to publish these books on the order of his spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and he asked all the devotees to help him continue to publish more and more volumes of Srimad Bhagavatam. And that was all done in Hawaii, and we were always really proud, thinking that Prabhupada translates here more than anywhere else in the world. Prabhupada loves coming to Hawaii. So we felt very special in Hawaii, and Prabhupada would make us feel like that. I think he really did like Hawaii, and I think the devotees reciprocated with that mood, and just whatever we could do to make it special for Prabhupada, what we would do.
In Dallas in 1972, Srila Prabhupada, there's a very wonderful and flavorful story about how Sri Sri Radha Kalachandji came to the Dallas temple. It's very exciting. So the deities arrived the same day as Srila Prabhupada, and Srila Prabhupada had instructed that the deities be installed in 2 days. So the deities were covered with a very sticky substance. So there were pieces of burlap stuck. And even in the painted areas, like his eyes, etc., there were little pieces of burlap and cloth that were getting stuck to it because they were continuing to be sticky. So the head pujari, Ichamari, she was very concerned because she knew that when we would be dressing the deities in the future, that we would have some difficulty. So we tried every solvent that we could think of. There was nothing that would activate this sticky substance to come off. It was something like dupe. It actually would come up, So Ichamati left me in charge of taking this stuff off at the end, when we'd already tried everything. And I'd already brought up the point of paint remover, and we had thought about it a little bit. And finally, she left, and I was still trying different substances. And then I began to use the paint remover, and how it happened, I don't know. I don't know if just in the course of using the paint remover on the large areas, if it came off on the painted area, however it started happening, I don't know. But my great offense was that in the end I decided to just go ahead. It was all right. I could go ahead and take all the paint off of the deities, and I could repaint them in 2 days' time. I had the confidence that I could do this. So I removed all the paint from the deities, and when the head pujari came back, she was in a total state of shock. I said, that's all right, She was in a state of shock. It was irreparable. And I began to understand what I had done, in an unauthorized way. Now, I did not know at this time that these deities were already installed. I thought this was prior to them being installed. I didn't know that they had, in one sense, they had been worshipped and that they were 500-year-old deities. I didn't know any of this history at that time. This does not minimize my offense. But anyway, so then I'm painting all night long in Srila Prabhupada's quarters. I'm painting these deities. And then the next morning, all night long, and then I touched the deity, and the deity was totally wet. It was like I was using all this, what do you call it, Japan dryer, etc., and I was confident. And I could see something is wrong, something is not happening. This is not acting according to plan. The paint is totally wet. So Srila Prabhupada's on his morning walk, and Satsrupa Maharaj, he informs Srila Prabhupada of the situation. And Srila Prabhupada stops, and he says, this is my version of it, the best that I can know. He said, pack my bags immediately. I am leaving this temple. You can do whatever you like with the deities, but just don't consult me. So naturally, I went into a suicidal state, very emotionally crying and devastated by my offense of having acted in an unauthorized way. And so then a meeting was called, and you have the GBC, the head pujari, the temple president, everyone's there. And it's in Srila Prabhupada's room. And Srila Prabhupada says, so who has done this? And everyone says, Jahnava did it. So then Srila Prabhupada turns his glance over to me. And he says, who told you to do this? And at this moment, I was totally choked with emotion. There was no question of speech coming out of my mouth. And at the same time, I remember the Srimad Bhagavatam, where the bull does not blame anyone for his condition. So remembering this section of the Bhagavatam, I could have pointed my finger a few places, but I didn't. And I felt that I should not do this. And then Srila Prabhupada seemed a little, from within, I felt a little that Srila Prabhupada was condoning or approving that I'm not blaming someone else. So then Srila Prabhupada said, why did you do this? And again, I'm so choked with emotion, because I've just been crying for 2 hours in a hysterical state. And so Srila Prabhupada begins to be disgusted with me. And he starts to turn he starts to turn his glance away from me and his mercy away from me. And I thought, Krishna's kicking and his kissing are the same. I want it. I want whatever Srila Prabhupada has to give me. It's mine. This is my quota. So I choked it off. I said, nonsense, Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada said, why have you done this? Nonsense, Srila Prabhupada. So Srila Prabhupada said, suicidal nonsense. And then he turns, now he's turning away from me. I've gotten my mercy. And he's turning away and he's saying, no. Then he asks me, he says, so what is to be done about it? And now I'm beginning to feel, he's changed his tone of voice a little bit, and he seems pleased. So I felt a little, well, maybe it's not all that bad, a little let off the hook. So I said, well, I just called Bharat Raj in LA and explained the situation to him, that this paint is not drying, and so on and so forth. And he suggested that I use, so Prabhupada said, Bharat Raj, I am your spiritual master, and I am sitting right in front of you. Why you do not ask me? And I assure you that the sound reverberations of that practically Nrsinga form of Srila Prabhupada, his servant of Lord Nrsingadev, is going out into the universe, still reverberating to this day. It took me about 2 or 3 years to calm down from that. It was so a wonderful cleansing process. And so then Srila Prabhupada is practically disgusted with me. And he turns his glance away from me and he says, so what is to be done about this? So then Ichumati, in all humility, says the same thing I just did, but with humility. She says, well, Srila Prabhupada, actually, there's this kind of enamel paint, and if we use this enamel paint, it can dry within 6 to 8 hours. Would it be all right with you if we use this kind of paint? And Srila Prabhupada said, do it immediately.
I do remember, though, Prabhupada in Hawaii, one time he was talking about the devotees and the regulated principles. And because the devotees in Hawaii were especially notorious for falling down. They used to call it a sannyasi graveyard, and Prabhupada had actually said at one point, Hawaii was perfect for spiritual life. And then he goes, also material life. So Prabhupada would really, I think on a regular basis, he would kind of like push home the point. And one time he was talking about the regulated principles, and he said, and they were talking like, some people are chanting, but they don't follow the regulated principles. And he said, yeah, maybe that he said they may have to chant for 700 lifetimes before they can follow the regulated principles. And I remember thinking, well, I don't want to have to do that. I better get serious here. I think regularly you hear when he got to a temple, Prabhupada would ask, is everything okay or is everything all right? And I remember, temples weren't, as much as we were in ecstasy serving Srila Prabhupada, we were still very immature, young people, and there were always disagreements and fights and craziness and stuff. But when Prabhupada would ask that question, just by his saying, is everything all right? Immediately, it would just dissipate anything. Even if you've just been in a big fight or the temple commander was on your case, anything you had been through, it was all like, it was gone. It was completely gone. And yeah, everything's all right. Everything's okay. And also I remember feeling that Prabhupada wasn't just saying that. He actually meant it. He was concerned. He wanted to know that we were all right. I really could feel that Prabhupada, when he said that, I could feel that Prabhupada really cared about us. He really loved us, and he really appreciated what we were doing for him. When he said that, you could feel the love. And like I said, when he said, is everything all right? It was all right.
This was in late 1972, if I'm not wrong. Prabhupada came to New York. And at that time, ISKCON Press was in New York, in Brooklyn. So after a few days of Prabhupada's stay there, the artists had a chance to come and show Prabhupada all their new paintings, and he would look at them and approve or make suggestions or request corrections or whatever. So Prabhupada had looked at all the paintings, and then he asked for suddenly he was feeling something very deep within himself, and he asked for this song, his own bhajan tape of Jeev Jago to be played. And so the tape player was brought in, and he simply sat there listening, and he was in Vedic language and samadhi. He closed his eyes, and he was obviously with Krishna in the spiritual world. And he didn't open his eyes until the tape was over. Then he opened his eyes, and again it was so powerful that there was just silence in the room. No one could say anything. No one could move. Then Jadurani said that she had one more painting she hadn't showed Prabhupada. So at that point she brought the painting in. Prabhupada was still in this very, very deep internal mood. So he looked at the painting and he said, "It's very good." Then he said, "Actually, all of you are very good." And at this point he was speaking very, very seriously. He became very humble. In other words, philosophically what we can say is at that point, due to his love for Krishna, he could no longer pretend to be the Madhyamadikari who's preaching. He actually was exhibiting his real position as a Paramahamsa. And so he looked at all of us, and I remember very seriously and very humbly he said, "Actually, all of you are very good. And in your association, even I am good. Otherwise, I'm very bad." Very, very, so everyone was sort of shocked and no one could say anything or hardly breathe. And so gradually, one by one, we just sort of offered obeisances and left the room.
Prabhupada wrote me in a letter that I had so many opportunities for sense gratification throughout my life, but Krishna always saved me, and I never knew what is meat eating, gambling, intoxication, or illicit sex. And he said, he wrote this in a letter, he said, "There was never a moment when I was ever forgetful of Krishna." He actually wrote that in a letter to me. He said, "There was never a moment when I was ever forgetful of Krishna."
Krishna Kirtana Gana Tana Pano Premamritam Manidhi Dhira Dhira Jana Priyau Priyakarau Nirmasaram Pujitau Sri Chaitanya Kripa Bharau Bhubi Bhuva Bharavahantarakam